Have you ever stopped to think about what drives someone to commit the most brutal and disturbing crimes in history? Is evil innate, or does the mind of a psychopath operate on a logic that defies everything we believe about humanity? Today, we will explore 5 real crimes explained by psychopathy, where coldness, manipulation, and lack of empathy challenged investigations and shocked the world. Get ready for a disturbing and eye-opening journey. This video is not just about telling horror stories. It's about understanding the mechanisms behind criminal minds, learning how to identify signs of psychopathic behavior, and, above all, protecting yourself and those you love. Knowing what makes these people so dangerous might be the key to recognizing hidden threats at work, in relationships, or even in your own neighborhood. This knowledge can literally save lives. Now tell me, have you ever dealt with someone who seemed incapable of feeling remorse, someone who manipulated you so subtly that you only realized it when it was too late? Or maybe you're just curious about how science explains evil in its purest form? If so, you're in the right place. These 5 cases will shock you but will also open your eyes to the dark truth about the psychopaths among us. Don't forget to like this video, it helps a lot in bringing more content like this to you. Share it with someone who also needs to know about this, maybe even with that person who left you with a sense of unease. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the upcoming cases we'll unravel here will be even more intense. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, the Mind of Chaos. Picture this, it's a hot and quiet night, the windows are open, letting the air circulate, and the silence feels like an invitation to peace. Then, a noise, a sound that shouldn't be there. It's subtle, a creak, perhaps a window being opened. Before you realize it, someone is inside your house. They are not there by accident. It's not just a burglar. They want something much more valuable, your fear. This was Richard Ramirez's modus operandi, known as the Night Stalker, who terrorized California in the mid-1980s. His attacks were unpredictable, his choices seemingly random. He broke into homes without a clear pattern, young, old, couples. It didn't matter. What he sought was pure terror. Ramirez didn't kill just for the sake of killing, he wanted to provoke a wave of panic that transcended his direct victims. For him, fear was a weapon more powerful than any knife or gun. Behind his slim and dark figure hid an individual marked by a dangerous combination of psychopathic impulsivity and distorted beliefs. Ramirez was fascinated by the occult, openly declaring his devotion to Satan. In many of his crimes, he left satanic symbols, turning each scene into a macabre ritual. But was this devotion to the occult genuine or merely a mask to justify his cruelty? Some experts believe he used Satanism as a way to see himself as something greater, almost supernatural. Others suggest it was a reflection of his emotional emptiness, a way to fill the inner chaos that dominated him. Ramirez didn't plan his crimes with the precision of other serial killers. He was chaos in motion, impulsive and unpredictable. This made him even more dangerous. His lack of empathy and impulse control created a lethal combination. One moment, he could break into a house and shoot his victims without hesitation. In another, he used brutal and prolonged methods, savoring the suffering he caused. He wasn't seeking wealth or revenge. What he truly craved was the feeling of power. And this power came not only from violence but from the way he shaped terror in society. Panic spread through affected communities like fire in a dry field. Homes that were once considered sanctuaries began to be seen as vulnerable. Closing windows or locking doors became routine. For many, the simple act of sleeping felt risky. Ramirez, like a nocturnal predator, was the embodiment of insecurity. Despite this, he was not invincible. His capture revealed more about his mind than any courtroom could imagine. During the trial, he was defiant, mocking his victims and declaring his love for Satanism. He seemed to enjoy the spectacle, as if the courtroom was just another stage for his horror show. At the same time, there were signs of a deeply fractured mind. His childhood was marked by abuse, violence, and early exposure to pornography and crimes. The figure of his cousin, a Vietnam War veteran who told grotesque stories of his actions, was also pivotal in shaping Ramirez's distorted view of reality. But this raises an uncomfortable question: to what extent did the circumstances of his life shape the monster he became? Was Ramirez a product of his traumas, or was psychopathy already rooted in his essence, waiting to emerge? His dark legacy remains an example of how fear can be as powerful a weapon as any other. For Richard Ramirez, each crime was more than an act of violence, it was a reminder that chaos can invade even the safest places. He turned peaceful nights into living nightmares, and his story serves as a reminder that the real threat often comes from where we least expect it. After all, who can truly say they are safe? Belle Gunness, the Black Widow, manipulation and death. Picture this: a lonely man reads an ad in a newspaper. He's simple, hardworking, seeking stability and, above all, companionship. The text seems straightforward: wealthy widow, owner of a prosperous farm, seeks an honest gentleman for marriage. He doesn't hesitate. He writes a letter, dreaming of a future of comfort alongside an attractive and independent woman. But what awaits him is far from love or stability. His fate is already sealed: he will never be seen again. This was the trap set by Belle Gunness, one of the most cunning serial killers in history. Active in the late 19th century, she lured vulnerable men with promises of wealth and marriage. Once they trusted her, Belle would eliminate them, often by poisoning or striking her victims to death. To her, these men were mere tools to achieve her goals: money and survival. Behind this seemingly charismatic woman lay a dark, cold, and calculating mind. Belle wasn't driven by passion or impulse but by relentless logic. She operated like a true businesswoman of crime. Every move was planned, every victim carefully chosen. But what made Belle even more terrifying was her ability to manipulate not only her victims but also the community around her. To her neighbors, she was a strong, determined woman struggling to maintain her farm after her husband's death. No one suspected what was buried in her backyard. Key psychological traits. Emotional manipulation. Belle was a master at exploiting vulnerabilities, whether the desire for love or greed for wealth. Lack of remorse. She didn't see her victims as people but as means to an end. Strategic coldness. She planned every crime with precision, leaving no room for mistakes. For Belle, those around her were disposable. Her ability to emotionally dissociate from the brutal acts she committed reveals a classic psychopathic trait. But her story raises a question: was she born this way, or was she shaped by the extreme hardships of her life? After all, Belle was a Norwegian immigrant fighting to survive in a new country, facing poverty and discrimination. Is it possible that she rationalized her crimes as a means of survival? What makes Belle Gunness unique is the contrast between her public image and her dark reality. To the community, she was a woman capable of overcoming all adversities; to her victims, she was an unrelenting predator. Her ability to create this social mask reinforces her psychological complexity. Now think about this. If you had seen Belle's ad in the newspaper, would you have been suspicious or tempted by her promises? And more importantly, could people like Belle still operate today, with technology exposing our intentions? The case of Belle Gunness shows how psychopathy can be disguised with charisma and intelligence. Her story is a reminder that danger doesn't always come with a threatening face. Often, it smiles and makes promises that seem too good to be true. What would you do if you were in her victim's place? Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, the monster's awareness. Picture this: you're on the road, the sun setting on the horizon, and you decide to hitchhike. A car stops, the driver smiles and seems polite, maybe even kind. He asks friendly questions: where are you headed, or is everything okay with you? Everything seems normal, but something in his gaze doesn't match. There's a weight, an intention you can't decipher. Still, you get in. For Ed Kemper, it was the beginning of another horror story. Ed Kemper wasn't just a serial killer. He was a disturbing mind that challenged notions of normality. Responsible for the deaths of at least 10 people, including his own mother, Kemper possessed an extraordinary intelligence. He didn't just understand his psychopathy, he studied and recognized it. Kemper knew he was dangerous and, in his own words, shouldn't be free. This self-awareness is what makes his story so unsettling. From an early age, Kemper's life was marked by abuse and rejection. He harbored a deep hatred for his mother, who constantly humiliated him and treated him as an aberration. This hatred would become the root of his crimes, especially against women. For Kemper, each victim was a projection of this accumulated resentment, an attempt to control something he could never master, his own pain. Key psychological traits. Extreme self-awareness. Kemper not only understood his psychopathy but could explain it with precision. Desire for control. He sought power over his victims as a way to compensate for the control he never had in his personal life. Emotional coldness. Despite appearing cooperative and rational, he could commit unimaginable acts of brutality without remorse. But what makes Ed Kemper so intriguing is his relationship with the authorities. After committing his crimes, he voluntarily turned himself into the police and, almost disturbingly, cooperated with investigators. He wanted to be heard, understood, almost as if he were waiting for someone to save him from himself. This duality, a monster conscious of his monstrosity, makes him one of the most unsettling cases in criminal history. How can someone so intelligent and self-aware continue committing crimes? Did Kemper want to be stopped, or was it all part of his psychological game? Ed Kemper forces us to confront an uncomfortable question: is it possible that some monsters have full awareness of what they are but choose to move forward for a greater need, power, control, or simply attention? His story is a reminder that psychopathy can come in an intelligent, articulate, and even cooperative package. But deep down, the danger remains the same. So, would you accept that ride? Albert Fish, the Gray Man Cannibal, sadism personified. Picture this: a child plays in front of their house under the watchful eye of their parents. An elderly man, thin and seemingly harmless, approaches with a friendly smile. He is polite, almost kind. He offers sweets and stories to entertain the child. Minutes later, the child disappears. Days turn into weeks, until a letter arrives, shattering the family's world. The words within describe such grotesque details that no one can read them without shuddering. This was Albert Fish, one of the most disturbing killers in history. Nicknamed the Gray Man, Fish used his harmless appearance to lure vulnerable children. But his true nature was that of an extreme sadist, someone who found pleasure in inflicting pain and prolonging the suffering of his victims and their families. Fish was not an ordinary killer. He saw suffering as something almost spiritual, mixing his acts with religious delusions. He believed that God had sent him to punish sinners and that his actions, as grotesque as they were, served a divine purpose. This belief absolved him of any remorse, turning his crimes into dark rituals. His predilection for children was especially terrifying. He didn't just take their lives, he turned the act into a meticulous work of sadism. Fish made sure to send letters to the families, detailing his acts in graphic and inhuman terms. This behavior reveals a sick need for control, a pleasure in reliving his crimes while prolonging the family's suffering. Key psychological traits. Absolute sadism. For Fish, pain was the essence of pleasure, whether inflicted on others or himself. Religious delusions. He saw himself as an instrument of God, justifying his most cruel acts. Emotional manipulation. His letters were as cruel as his acts, leaving psychological scars on the victims' families. The mask of normality. What made Fish even more terrifying was his ability to go unnoticed. He seemed like a frail, polite, and harmless old man. People trusted him. He was the type of man you'd greet on the street, never imagining what he was doing in secret. This duality, the gentle appearance hiding the monster, is one of the most unsettling aspects of his story. How can someone combine such brutality with such an ordinary appearance? And more importantly, do his delusions absolve him of any moral responsibility, or do they only amplify the monstrosity of his actions? Albert Fish forces us to confront the limits of human evil. He wasn't just a killer, he was a sadist who used his distorted faith as justification for the terror he caused. His story is a reminder that the real danger might be hidden in the most unsuspecting people, the ones we smile at on the street, never suspecting the darkness they carry. Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, the two-faced murderer. Picture this: you're at a community meeting, surrounded by neighbors and friends. The group leader, a respected man with a common appearance, smiles as he organizes the next event. He's someone everyone trusts, calm, dedicated, an example to follow. Now imagine discovering that this same man is responsible for a series of brutal murders. This is Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer. BTK, bind, torture, kill, was more than a signature, it was a manifesto. Between 1974 and 1991, Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 people, but what made him truly terrifying wasn't just the brutality of his crimes. It was his ability to live a double life, balancing his impeccable public persona with a dark and cruel side. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, and an active member of the local church, a pillar of the community. This mask of normalcy was his greatest weapon. Key psychological traits. Need for control. Rader meticulously planned his crimes. He carefully chose his victims, studied their routines, and turned each murder into a spectacle of power. Emotional coldness. During his attacks, he displayed an alarming ability to dissociate, treating his victims as objects. Inflated ego. Rader wasn't content just to kill. He needed recognition. He sent detailed letters to the police and the media, taunting authorities and bragging about his acts. For Rader, control was everything. He didn't kill just for the sake of it, he needed to be the orchestrator of every moment, from the planning to the act itself. After the crime, he savored the impact he caused, writing letters that described his actions in sadistic detail. He wanted to be feared, wanted the world to know that BTK was still out there. At the same time, he was the community leader, the man who helped others feel safe. This duality is what makes his story so disturbing. Rader's psychological game. Rader wasn't just a killer, he was a manipulator of minds. His letters to the authorities weren't just confessions, they were tools of power. He enjoyed toying with the police, mocking their inability to catch him. This need for attention and validation is a hallmark of extreme narcissism, often found in psychopaths. But Rader was more than a narcissist. He was a strategist, someone who knew how to manipulate public perception while satisfying his darkest impulses. He understood that his facade of a common man was his best defense, no one would suspect the perfect neighbor. Think about this. How can someone live such a double life without raising suspicion? Did Rader truly believe he could maintain this facade forever, or did he enjoy the risk of being discovered?